going to call Decade Foundations. Congratulations on taking the first steps towards shooting the lower scores that you know you're capable of by joining the new product that we're going to call Decade Foundations. I realized last summer when I was caddying for a young junior golfer in the U.S. Junior Amateur Qualifier that the full elite program is a lot to digest. With that in mind, I started thinking about how I could create a better product to serve not only just the junior golfer, but the club and recreational player as well, who the full elite program might be just a little bit more than they actually need. So, what we're going to do in this program is we're going to actually slow down the way the content is delivered to you. Each month we're going to slowly build on the prior month's objectives. This month is going to have the most content in it so we can get headed in the right direction as quickly as possible, and then in each of the following months we'll slowly continue adding to these core principles we're going to learn in month 1. I won't waste too much time in this video on the history of Decade, but I do think it's important that you recognize that a lot of the successes of many of these young players on the PGA Tour come from learning the Decade Foundations at a young age. The real difficulty in learning the game of golf is the fact that it's the only sport in the world that's not played on a uniform field of competition, meaning all basketball courts are the same, all football fields are the same. But in golf, not only are all courses different, holes within the same course are different, obviously. This creates a big burden for learning how to play the game strategically correctly. Add to that the fact that you're typically not practicing on the field of competition, and typically your lessons with your instructor are not on the field of competition. All of this adds up to the fact that golf is one of the hardest, if not the hardest, sports to learn to play strategically correctly. If you've ever felt frustrated, like you've left shots on the golf course at the end of a round, I can assure you what you're about to learn is the reason why. Prioritizing how to stop making these very basic mistakes is how you're going to get your golf scores going lower, your happiness going higher, and your overall sanity headed in the right direction. It's how players like Bryson DeChambeau went from being ranked 57th in the world when he sat through the Decade Seminar in February of 2015 to the reigning NCAA individual and U.S. Amateur champion within 6 months. When asked the night before the finals of the U.S. Amateur what's changed in his game in the last 6 months, Bryson specifically said, "I use a system that Scott Fawcett came up with. He's helped me understand the percentage of going for flags, when to go for flags and when not to. These are the things you're going to learn over the next 6 months that'll help you stop feeling like you've wasted shots every single time you tee it up." The success and the simplicity of the Decade system is why players like Doc Redman give me a buzz to come caddy for them when things aren't going quite as they had planned when they first turned professional, even after having quite a bit of success as an amateur using the Decade system. It's how players like Will Zalatoris went from being ranked 3,300 in the world to winning the Texas Amateur and U.S. Junior in the summer of 2014. Again, I only tell you these things to give you the confidence to fully commit to Decade in everything you're going to learn in this course. I won't waste any more time dropping names, even though I love doing it. Let's get started learning how to shoot lower scores. What we'll be discussing has really always stood out at the highest end of the games. The best players in the world have always understood that there's this magical element of scoring, course management, psychology, whatever name you want to give it. The best players have always been familiar with these ideas, but it typically took them decades. It's why I called it Decade. It typically took them decades to learn what you're now going to learn over the course of a couple months. A guy like Raymond Floyd even wrote about it in his book, The Elements of Scoring. In it, he says, the reason people don't shoot lower scores, to be blunt, is that most people don't know how to play. Not how to swing or how to hit the ball further, how to play the game. He says, don't take that the wrong way. It's not an easy thing to know. In fact, when all is said and done, it's the hardest. I couldn't agree with that idea more. I tell people all the time that I truly believe one of the hardest skills in golf is the seemingly easy task of not seeing the flagstick. Raymond Floyd continues, learning to play golf, learning to score is a lifelong process. I know that. At age 56, I'm still learning. And this is the quote that I absolutely love, and it's really showcases how whenever I've caddied for players, they've always played better golf, because we do a great job of removing emotion from the decision-making process. We pick solid, concise targets, and then we move on about our business, whether the shot was good or bad. Back to Raymond Floyd, he says, but here's the hard truth. If I somehow was given your physical game and we had a match, I would still beat you 99 times out of 100 because I know how to play the game better than you do. Oftentimes, it's not about improving your physical skills, it's about understanding what to do with those physical skills. I feel like I'm in danger of just actually reading this book to you in this video series, but Raymond continues a couple pages later. To me, a scorer is someone who consistently gets the most from his skill set, who often shoots scores that are better than the way he or she hits the ball, and who in that sense regularly beats the golf course. I'll add to that, and his competition. Obviously, since I just quoted about a half a page from this book, I do suggest that you add it to your library, because when you combine a lot of what he talks about in the book with the more modern data and analytics that I'll really dig into, along with the target selections and decade psychology and mindset tricks, you just won't believe how quickly your scores are about to start dropping. Well, with that in mind, how do your scores start dropping? Well, from the Decade Portal, we know that as your scoring average drops through the 70s, as you improve 3 shots from 78.8 to 75.8, we know that 0.54 of those 3 shots is from an increase in birdies. Same thing from 75.8 to 72.9. That 3-stroke roughly improvement, about 0.9 of that is from an increase in birdies. Same thing all the way down to 70.1. However, over 1 shot is from a decrease in bogeys, not to mention a decrease in doubles. When we actually look at the percentages of what the improvement comes from, you'll see that 70 to 80% of the lowering of your scores as you improve through the 70s is attributed to bogey and higher avoidance. A crazy stat to me is, as your scoring average drops from 95 to 79, only 1 of those 16 shots is from an increase in birdies, meaning a 79 average guy only makes 1 birdie more per round than a 95 shooter. The other 15 shots are all from bogey and higher avoidance. And this gets back to a saying that I like to talk about. It's far easier to intentionally not lose shots than it is to intentionally gain shots, meaning it's hard to go out and intentionally do great things, but it's typically not that hard, depending on your skill level, to go out and intentionally not do really bad things. Again, what that means to you as a 70 shooter or a 100 shooter could be completely different things, but typically the worst 20 percentile of your golf shots are simply from trying to do a little bit too much based on what your skill level is. I have 3 main things that I think are a little bit non-traditional that I really try to reinforce with my players. Those 3 things are: winning requires luck, stop trying to make birdies, and stop trying to make putts. Now, I've used Jordan Spieth's victory at the 2015 Masters for several years, but we're going to go ahead and modernize this a little bit here. Let's look at Tiger's flawless, beautiful, and decisive victory at the 2019 Masters as we dig into this idea that winning requires luck. And in order to do this correctly, I need to explain to you how strokes gain works. Now, obviously, I'm a huge Mark Brody fan. He is the creator of the strokes gain statistics. None of my work would have been possible without the great work that he did. So his book, Every Shot Counts, trust me, I'm going to give you several books to read throughout this series. His book, Every Shot Counts, should definitely make that list. And the beauty of Brilliant Things is it can take a really complex idea and make it very simple for the end user. What we do here is, on the PGA Tour, an 8-foot putt has a 50% make rate, meaning they make half, they miss half, just like flipping a coin. So I have an expected value from an 8-foot putt of roughly 1.5 strokes to hole out. Well, obviously you can't hit the putt 1.5 times. But if I have an 8-foot putt with an expectation of 1.5 strokes and I make that 8-foot putt, that means that I have moved it 1.5 strokes closer to the hole in only 1 stroke, in essence gaining a half a stroke. Now, if I 2-putt from 8 feet, I have done the same thing where I have moved the ball 1.5 strokes closer to the hole in 2 strokes. I in essence lose a half a stroke. So think of it this way. If on back-to-back holes I have 2 8-foot putts and I make one and I 2-putt one, I've used 3 total putts on 2 holes played. Well, 3 divided by 2 is 1.5 putts per hole, which is exactly what my expectation is on an 8-foot putt. So for these 2 holes, I am 0 strokes gained putting. Well, to keep on taking this one step further and building on this idea, because of the 15 million shots in the ShotLink database of the PGA Tour and Mark Brody's great work in Every Shot Counts, we now know how many strokes it takes to hole out on average from the tee box on tour, the fairway, the rough, the sand, and the last category is called recovery. And recovery is simply the trees. The combination of the GPS coordinates and the mapping that they do on each golf course essentially allows the data to tell us if a golf shot was in the trees or not. And just like we know that an 8-foot putt on average requires 1.5 strokes to hole out, we know that essentially anywhere from 100 to 200 yards in the trees, it takes a PGA Tour player roughly 3.8 strokes to hole out. That doesn't include the tee shot that got him in the trees. So basically, once you're in the trees, you're making bogey roughly 80% of the time if you're 100 to 200 yards. Don't forget, we're talking tour players here. It's not imperative that you understand all that strokes gain math, but it really does help with the mindset and psychology that we'll talk about throughout this course. The strokes gain math really is the backbone of everything that Decade was built on. Now I'll agree, that was a long road to walk, just that way we could circle back now to the whole idea that winning requires luck. We're going to take a look at Tiger in the trees left on number 14 at Augusta on Thursday. Again, his expectation from here should be bogey roughly 80% of the time. For starters, he obviously wound up with some sort of a pretty nice hallway here, so his actual expectation here would not be 3.8, but the fact that he had a shot from that deep in the trees is pretty lucky. He hits an amazing shot out to roughly, what does that look like, 25 feet? And now on this putt, he's going to hit it way too hard, and luckily it has a wreck with the hole because this putt is going at least 8 foot by. So now he's turned, probably a 4.2 into a birdie. Here he is on Friday in the exact same spot. This time he does have more trouble as he has to flight it through the branches, which he does so successfully because he's a magician, to roughly 20 feet. He then walks up and takes that putt and knocks it right in the hole. So he definitely turned a 80% bogey into a birdie on that particular shot. And here he is on 13 on Saturday after laying up, hitting an amazing shot, skipping it up that ridge, a nice little nipper to about 5 feet, and he goes ahead and makes that for birdie also. But why did he have to lay up on 13 in the first place? Well, he snap hooked it off the tee box and hit the trees and came back into the fairway. Now he wasn't even around the corner, so he had to lay it up. So now he's hit it in the trees twice on 14, made birdie both times on Thursday and Friday. And now on 13 on Saturday, he's hit it left of the hazard off of a tree and still made birdie. And this is why I say, winning requires luck. And we all know you can't force luck, so by extension, you also can't force winning. This is why, and you're going to hear this a million times in this series, golf requires patience and discipline. You simply cannot get out there and try to force things, ever. The Next Decade Foundation is a very simple idea, but is very difficult to trust and implement. Stop trying to make birdies. Now hear me out on this one. The argument can be made that every birdie you ever make requires a reasonable amount of luck or variance, to use a mathy term. And don't worry, I'm not going to use very many big words in my videos because, well, I don't know very many big words. But what I mean by variance is that shot patterns are very big and the hole is very, very small. Getting your shot to finish close to the hole is not something that even the best players in the world do very often. I mean, sure, if you hit enough shots and play enough holes, it will just magically happen occasionally, but the specific shot that you hit close, almost by definition, required quite a few things to line up correctly. This is because shot patterns resemble the blast from a shotgun. I mean, yes, a really big shotgun, but a shotgun nonetheless. Here we have a shot pattern from a 195-yard par 3 on the PGA Tour. These are the best players in the world hitting every single shot off of a tee, off of a flat piece of grass. And just like I'm asking you to think about things a little differently than you're used to, we're also going to use a few different tools to teach golf differently than you're used to. I've already introduced math, and now we're going to see how to use a satellite to really drive a point home. This is number 15 from the Copperhead course at Innisbrook. This is actually the hole that the shotgun blast you were just looking at is from. You can see here that it's 600 feet from the back tee box to the middle of the green, which is 200 yards. Switching back to the shot pattern, we obviously have no idea where the actual green is, the bunkers, or the hole is, nothing. But I would say the center of the shot pattern of the inner 80% of these shots is roughly right here. Now, the really fun part of this exercise is when I take this shot pattern with now the center of the shot pattern in, and I go ahead and lay in the actual image of where the green sits. Pretty crazy, huh? So when I say 45 yards from roughly over here to right of the green and 45 yards deep, you can see there's a shot hit way down here short of the bunker. From there all the way to the back of the green, we can use a satellite to now center this over the green and scroll in. Go ahead and click that off. We're going to go over here to the right side. You right click, measure distance. You left click over here where it is, bring this obviously into view, and you can see going back to the green, this is 42 yards to right here. That shot pattern, let's bring it back in for a second. There's balls over here right of the green, all the way over here to the left edge of the bunker. Left edge of the bunker, all the way over here to the right of the green. So, sorry, I might have grossed it up a little bit. 42 yards instead of 45 yards. And now there were golf shots short of the bunker here and hit all the way along. And you can see 139 feet. Let's bring that image back in. You can see there's golf shots in here short to all the way long. 45 yards deep and 45 yards wide. I say this jokingly all the time as a twice failed playing professional. I'm not allowed to make this statement, but that's not very good. But obviously it is, because these are the best players in the world. This shows you how often they hit materially bad shots, and in my opinion, a lot of that comes from trying to do too much. Most of these golf shots over here in the left bunker are from guys who probably like to fade it, trying to hit little chippy draws because they're trying to get a look at birdie to this front left hole location on a hole that the scoring average is usually right around 3.2. It's just not necessary. If the scoring average is 3.2, you don't need to make very many birdies in order to accomplish that. What you don't want to be doing is making the silly bogeys that you, whatever your skill level is, can actually avoid. These guys are better than this shot pattern, period. If you actually put on the range a target out in the middle of the range and had them hit a 200-yard shot, their shot pattern would never be this big, period. This obviously then just shows that they are most likely trying to do way too much, trying to get looks at birdie, rather than accepting, as I mentioned earlier in the video, that the variance within your shot pattern will create those birdie looks. So think about it this way. If in this situation, if we took all of the shots here and we shifted them about 4 or 5 yards further to the right, yeah, it would stink for these guys that happen to hit it close and make birdie, but all of these shots would now be those shots for birdie. You actually would still make basically the exact same amount of birdies. What we're doing though is trading out these outlier shots over here for slightly longer shots over here. The up and down rate from here will for sure be better than the up and down rate from over here. That's actually what proper course management does. It's not about making more birdies, it's about making fewer bogeys, which, if we circle back to the beginning of the video, all lines up with exactly what the math from our Decade Statistics portal illustrates as the case. This is why, yes, it's a very abstract thought, but if you stop trying to make birdies, I can assure you they will just accidentally come from variance within your shot pattern and or par 5s that you get it up and around the green and 2 on. That's how you make them. Now, let's move on to stop trying to make putts. Sometimes I wish that I didn't actually teach golf at this point in my life, because I have to relive some pretty harsh memories sometime in order to help you not make the same mistakes. I played in the 1999 US Open at Pinehurst, the one that Payne Stewart won. I was dead last in the field in putting. And I'm about to tell you that putting is easy once you understand, wait for it, what makes putting easy. The hole in golf is 4 1/4 inches wide. And if you think back to the strokes gain math, we know that an 8-foot putt on the PGA Tour, the make rate is 50%. So what we technically need to have happen for 50% of your putts to go in, we need to have the hole, more specifically the capture size of the hole, occupy 50% of the shot pattern, so that way it just magically gets in the way half the time. If you take a tee and put it roughly 2 inches outside of the left side of the hole, and 2 inches outside of the right side of the hole, you'll see that the hole now occupies half of that space. There isn't a tour player alive that can't control their line within an 8-inch window from 8 feet, and your read, as long as you can read it within roughly a half a cup of correct, you match all these things together and it quickly spits out your speed is basically the only thing that matters in whether you're a good putter or a bad putter. But I want you to think back to the last time you had a rough day on the greens. When you finished, you probably went and worked on your stroke, didn't you? Be honest now. What you've been watching is me make 33 7-foot putts in a row with a 3-year-old redhead pestering me to take her turn. And all I'm trying to illustrate with this is I'm going to hit my line basically every time. I'm certainly not a PGA Tour player, but I can assure you that if I can hit my line that well, they can too. So the real key to making putts is simply the speed you put it on, whether or not you can keep the capture size of the hole appropriate, meaning if you hit it too hard, the putts are going to start lipping out too often, and if you hit it too soft, well, the putt's not going to get to the hole and have no chance of going in, which from 8 feet is not ideal, from 30 feet, not always the worst outcome. And all of that is assuming that the putt is dead straight. Here we're looking at putt view. Once we have a putt with any break on it, obviously the putt view lines, this is the theoretical optimal speed. This low line right here represents the hardest you can hit a putt and it still go in. This high line represents the softest you can hit a putt and it still break and go in. Well, let's presume, just like I just showed you, I can actually start every putt on a pretty similar start line. Well, if I hit that putt too soft, it's going to start breaking sooner. If I hit that putt too hard, it's going to start breaking later. So really, given the exact same read and the exact same start line, all of a sudden now, the hole is occupying very little of my shot pattern because of my speed, not because of my line. I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, if this is the lowest start line I can have in it go in, and this is the highest start line I can have to make it go in, well, I can kick it between those two lines. It's just not that hard to control your line well enough to make the appropriate amount of putts. But speed is not quite so simple. Here's Aaron Wise, last year's PGA Tour Rookie of the Year. I had him hitting 20 putts from the exact same spot, trying to roll it on top of this fake hole. I'm just moving them off to the side because I'm trying to create a shot pattern without getting the prior putts in the way. But if you look at this shot pattern, I mean, he's rolling it pretty good line, but the speed is not necessarily the best. This is me. I'm actually kind of laughing. He's a super nice guy. And I was like, that's terrible. And he's like, is it really? I'm like, no, you're one of the best putters in the world. But this is not mind-boggling. Look at the depth of this pattern. Let's look at the ramifications of that in the putt view. What I'm showing you here is that Aaron's shot pattern from 20 feet, hitting the same putt over and over again, was 3.5 cups wide and 18 cups deep. That's truly amazing if you think about it. But the key is, this putt that he hit too soft would be the exact one I'm talking about here that starts breaking too soon. This putt that he hit too hard would be the exact one that makes the putt start breaking later. So even though he had a pretty tight dispersion directionally, his shot pattern actually became quite wide simply because of having quite a wide range of speed that he put on each putt, which obviously just means the hole occupies less space as a percentage of his shot pattern. The point of all this is just to illustrate the fact that you need to have very specific time set aside to practice your speed. I was always told when I was a junior golfer that speed is really important, but nobody ever really explained to me why or the actual mechanics of why. So I never learned how to prioritize what actually matters in putting. Back to that US Open that I played in, when I walked onto the putting green on Wednesday afternoon, Vijay Singh had just gotten on the putting green, and he's known as the longest, most hardworking practicer on the PGA Tour. And so I thought to myself, I'm going to just sit here and outlast him. You know, he's the man. I'm going to practice longer than he did. And we practiced for almost 2.5 hours. He, in retrospect, was doing a bunch of different speed drills and different drills, and I was just randomly rolling balls all around the place, not really focusing on any one specific outcome. And while Vijay certainly isn't known as the best putter in the history of the PGA Tour, by my last count, he's made approximately $81.3 million more than I have on the PGA Tour. I think we'll leave it there for this video, but just to recap, so far we've talked about the successes that the Decade program has had just to give you the confidence to really commit to what we're going to talk about over the course of this series. We learned how the strokes gain metrics are calculated and exactly what they mean. We learned that golf is mostly about bogey avoidance, far more at a minimum than it is about making more birdies. We established that winning requires luck. Just think about how lucky Tiger got with all those birdies from the trees and whatnot at Augusta in 2019. We talked about stop trying to make birdies and the fact that it's variance within your shot pattern that will give you those much valued, much desired looks at birdies, but you're really not forcing those ever. And then we finished it up by talking about stop trying to make putts and the importance of your speed versus your line and putting. Up next, we're going to talk about actual shots, trajectory, shaping it, and how the best players in the world go about playing the game of golf.